Can you buy me and take me as your slave? Pleaded the alien girl chained like a dog. The twin sons of Arcaris Prime beat down mercilessly on the sprawling fortress city, their combined heat turning the red sand into shimmering waves of torture. Kale Draven pulled his worn leather hood lower over his weathered face as he approached the massive stone gates. The journey across the wasteland had taken 3 days on foot after his transport broke down, and his water supplies were dangerously low. But he needed that navigation module if he ever hoped to leave this cursed planet. The marketplace buzzed with activity despite the scorching heat. Multi-armed Zoraxians bartered with scaled Vethans while blue-furred pack animals snorted and stamped in the dust. Kale moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his hand never straying far from the curved blade at his hip. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford in a place like this. The parts dealer's shop squatted in the shadow of the fortress's eastern wall, its entrance marked by a faded sign in 3 different languages. Cal pushed through the heavy curtain and immediately welcomed the relative coolness within. Shelves lined with mechanical components stretched toward the vaulted ceiling, and the air smelled of oil and metal shavings. Looking for something specific, human. The voice came from behind a counter piled high with circuit boards and power cells. Zorax the dealer emerged, his 4 arms moving independently as he sorted through inventory. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed dully in the dim light. Navigation module for a Corellian freighter, Cal said, placing a small pouch of credits on the counter. Model 743. Zorax's compound eyes fixed on the pouch, then on Cal. Expensive piece. You have enough. Before Cal could answer, a sound from the shop's darkest corner made him turn. It was barely a whisper, but something in it caught his attention. His eyes adjusted to the shadows, and what he saw made his blood run cold. A young woman knelt in the corner, heavy iron chains binding her wrists to the stone wall. But she wasn't human. Her skin was the pale blue of morning sky, and her hair fell like liquid silver around her shoulders. When she looked up, her eyes were the deep aquamarine of ocean depths, filled with a desperate hope that cut through Kyle like a blade. Please, she whispered, her voice carrying an accent he didn't recognize. Can you buy me and take me as your slave? Kale felt his jaw clench. He'd seen slavery throughout the outer systems, but something about this particular scene twisted his gut. The girl couldn't be more than 20 standard years old, and the bruises on her arms told a story he didn't want to imagine. She's not for sale to you, human, Zorax said quickly, following Kyle's gaze. Too expensive. Premium merchandise. How much? Cal asked, his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest. The dealer's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. More than you have. She's Illyrian. Last of her kind, very rare. Collector's item. The girl's eyes widened at Kale's question, and he saw tears gathering in them. Her lips moved silently, forming the word, please, again and again. Kyle looked at his credits, then at the navigation module he desperately needed. Without it, he'd be stranded on this hellish world indefinitely. But looking at those chains, at the desperate hope in those alien eyes, he made a choice that would change everything. I'll give you everything I have, he said, emptying his pouch completely onto the counter. Every credit, plus my sidearm. He unbuckled his plasma pistol and set it down. Take it or leave it. Zorax's eyes widened. You're insane. That's not nearly enough for her, and then you'll have nothing for the module. Maybe we can work out an arrangement, Kyle said. I'll do a job for you in exchange for the module. But first, I take the girl. The dealer's 4 hands drummed against the counter in a complex rhythm. Kyle could almost see the calculations running behind those compound eyes. Finally, Zorax reached under the counter and produced a set of keys. Very well, but the job isn't negotiable. You take it or you both die here. Kyle nodded grimly. We have a deal. The chains fell away with a clatter that seemed deafeningly loud in the shop's confines. The girl collapsed forward, her legs too weak to support her weight. Kyle caught her gently, feeling how light she was. When had she last eaten? What's your name? He asked softly. Aelia, she whispered. I am called Aelia. I'm Kyle. I just bought your freedom, not you. Do you understand the difference? Her aquamarine eyes searched his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Slowly she nodded. Zorax interrupted the moment by sliding a sealed container across the counter. It was black metal, about the size of a small weapon case, and it felt surprisingly heavy when Kale lifted it. This goes to Station Iridian 7, Docking Bay 42. Ask for Commander Rex Harrison. He'll give you the module in exchange. What's in it? Kyle asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know. Nothing that concerns you. Simple courier work, except Zorax's mandibles clicked again. The Dominion has been asking questions about humans lately. They seem very interested in finding ones who think too much about freedom. A chill ran down Cal's spine. The Dominion controlled most of this sector with an iron fist, and their interest in anything was rarely benign, but he'd already committed himself. When do I leave? Now would be good. The longer you stay in the city, the more likely they are to notice you. Cal helped Alia to her feet. She swayed but managed to stand on her own. Her silver hair caught what little light filtered through the shop's windows, and he noticed she was wearing little more than rags. We need supplies, he said to Zorax. Food, water, clothes for her. That will cost extra. Kyle's temper flared. I just gave you everything I had, plus a perfectly good weapon. Throw in some basics, or the deal's off. After another moment of calculation, Zorax disappeared into the back of the shop. He returned with a bundle of clothes, a water container, and some dried food that looked barely edible. This is all I can spare. Kale took the bundle and turned to leave, but Zorax called after him. Human, that girl you're so concerned about. Her people had abilities the Dominion fears. That's why they're all dead. Keep that in mind. The heat hit them like a physical blow as they emerged from the shop. Cal guided Alia into the shadow of a nearby alley and gave her the clothes. They were simple gray garments, rough but clean, and they fit her small frame reasonably well. Thank you, she said, her voice stronger now. But why did you do this? You don't know me. Nobody deserves to be chained like an animal, Kyle replied, scanning the street for signs of trouble. Can you walk? We need to get out of the city. I can walk. She straightened, and despite her obvious exhaustion, there was something regal in her bearing. But Kale, that container you carry, I can sense things about it. Dark things. Before he could ask what she meant, shouts erupted from the direction of Zorax's shop. 3 figures in black armor emerged, their faces hidden behind gleaming helmets. Dominion security forces. Move! Kyle hissed, grabbing Alia's hand and pulling her deeper into the alley network. They ran through the maze of narrow passages between the fortress buildings, their footsteps echoing off stone walls. Behind them, the shouts grew louder and more organized. Soon they could hear the distinctive whine of energy weapons powering up. Kel's mind raced as they ran. Zorax had betrayed them, probably before they'd even left the shop. This whole thing had been a setup from the beginning. He was a courier suicide, carrying something the Dominion wanted badly enough to kill for. They emerged from the alley network into the main bazaar, just as the afternoon heat was reaching its peak. The crowds provided some cover, but Kale knew it wouldn't last long. Dominion forces were trained to track targets through much worse conditions than this. Alia stumbled, and Kale realized she was running on pure willpower. Her blue skin had taken on a grayish tinge, and her breathing was labored. She needed food and rest, neither of which they could afford right now. This way, he said, spotting a food vendor's stall. Using the last few coins from his pocket, he bought some fruit and water. Alia devoured the food with desperate hunger, and some color returned to her cheeks. Better? He asked. She nodded, but her eyes were distant. Kale, the container, it holds a crystal, military secrets, information about what the Dominion did to my homeworld. How could you possibly know that? I told you I sense things. My people, the Illyrians, we could feel emotions, read the intentions behind actions. It's why the Dominion killed us all. The implications hit Kale like a hammer blow. If the container held evidence of Dominion war crimes, then he wasn't just a courier. He was a target with information that could shake the foundation of their empire. A woman's voice cut through the bizarre noise. This way, quickly. Kyle spun, his hand moving to where his sidearm should have been, then remembered he'd traded it away. A tall woman with bronze-colored skin and intricate tattoos covering her arms stood in the shadow of a silk merchant's booth. She wore practical clothing and had the bearing of someone accustomed to violence. Who are you? Kale demanded. Someone who knows what you're carrying and why half the Dominion fleet is looking for you. My name is Sarah Talorn, and I represent people who would very much like to see that crystal reach the right hands. And what hands would those be? The Free Worlds Alliance. We've been fighting the Dominion for years, but we've never had proof of their atrocities. Until now. Another shout echoed across the bazaar, closer this time. Sarah's expression grew urgent. Decide quickly. They've surrounded the marketplace. This is your only way out. Cal looked at Alia, who nodded slightly. Whatever abilities she possessed, she seemed to trust this stranger more than the alternatives. Lead the way. Sarah guided them through a series of hidden passages beneath the bazaar. The tunnels were ancient, carved from living rock and lit by occasional torch. The air was cooler here, and Cal felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. How did you know we'd be here? He asked as they walked. We've been watching Zorax for months. He's been the Dominion's go-to man for dirty work in this sector. When our sources told us he had something big planned, we positioned people throughout the city. And Alia, did you know about her? Sarah glanced back at the blue-skinned girl. We knew the Dominion was holding an Illyrian prisoner. We've been trying to rescue her for weeks. Why? Because Illyrians are the key to everything. Their empathic abilities can inspire courage in others, break through the fear and propaganda the Dominion uses to control populations. One Illyrian could spark a rebellion that would spread across the galaxy. They emerged from the tunnels into what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse. But as their eyes adjusted to the dim light, Cal realized it wasn't abandoned at all. Weapons racks lined the walls, and communication equipment hummed in the corners. At least a dozen people moved purposefully through the space, all of them armed. Welcome to the Resistance, Sarah said with a slight smile. An older man with graying hair and scars crisscrossing his weathered face approached them. His eyes fixed immediately on the container Cal carried. Is that it? He asked. According to our sources, yes. But we haven't opened it yet. The man extended a calloused hand to Cal. Name's Marcus Webb. I command this cell, and you just became the most important person in this sector. Cal shook the offered hand. I just wanted to buy a navigation module and get off this rock. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Nobody gets off this rock, son. Not anymore. The Dominion's locked down the entire system. You're stuck here until we either win or we all die trying. The weight of the situation settled over Cal like a burial shroud. He'd freed Alia from physical chains, only to trap them both in something much larger and more dangerous. Alia stepped forward, her aquamarine eyes bright in the warehouse's dim lighting. Commander Webb, if I may, the crystal contains more than just evidence of war crimes. It has the location of other survivors. Every conversation in the warehouse stopped. The silence was so complete that Cal could hear the distant rumble of the fortress's generators. Other survivors, Sarah whispered. Other Illyrians. A few, hidden in the outer systems. The Dominion believes they killed us all, but some escaped. Alia's voice grew stronger as she spoke. If we can reach them, if we can bring them together, we could spark a rebellion that would burn across the galaxy, Marcus finished. His scarred face had taken on an expression Cal had seen before, in the eyes of men who'd found something worth dying for. Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the warehouse. Red lights bathed everything in bloody illumination, and people grabbed weapons with the smooth efficiency of long practice. Dominion forces, someone shouted. Multiple squads converging on our position. Marcus swore creatively. Someone talked. We've got a leak. Sarah was already moving toward the weapon racks. She tossed a curved blade to Cal and another to Alia. Can you fight? Cal tested the weapon's balance. It was well made, with a grip that fit his hand perfectly. I've done my share. Alia hefted her blade uncertainly. I've never held a weapon before. Stay close to me, Cal told her. Do exactly what I say, when I say it. The warehouse doors exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Black-armored Dominion troopers poured through the opening, their energy weapons casting harsh blue light across the chaos that erupted. But these weren't just any troopers. Their armor was more elaborate, their weapons more advanced. Elite units. Someone very high up in the Dominion hierarchy wanted that crystal badly. Take cover, Marcus roared, diving behind a stack of supply crates. The warehouse erupted in violence. Energy bolts sizzled through the air, leaving smoking holes in walls and equipment. The resistance fighters responded with a mixture of primitive weapons and captured Dominion technology, but they were clearly outgunned. Kyle pulled Alia behind a thick support pillar, just as a bolt scorched the air where her head had been. Her face was pale with fear, but her eyes held a determination that surprised him. I can help, she said quietly. How? Instead of answering, she closed her eyes and pressed her hands against the pillar. Kel felt something wash over him, a sensation he couldn't quite identify. It was like standing in warm sunlight after a long night, or hearing a friend's voice after months of silence. Courage. She was projecting courage. Around the warehouse, the tenor of the battle began to change. The resistance fighters stood a little straighter, moved with more confidence. Their aim improved, and their voices grew stronger. Even Marcus seemed affected, his tactical commands carrying new authority. But the Dominion forces felt it too, and their response was immediate and violent. Fear began to creep into their movements, making them more aggressive and less coordinated. Impressive, a new voice said from the shattered entrance. I haven't felt Illyrian influence in years. Admiral Drackle stepped through the smoke and debris, his black uniform unmarked by the battle raging around him. He was tall and lean, with the kind of pale skin that never saw natural sunlight. His eyes were the flat gray of dead stars, and when he smiled, Cale felt ice in his veins. The infamous Butcher of Illyrian Prime, Aelia whispered. Her projection of courage faltered, and fear began to creep back into the warehouse atmosphere. That's Admiral Drackle to you, little bluebird, and you're going to come with me quietly, or I'll execute every person in this building. Over my dead body, Marcus snarled from across the warehouse. Drackle's smile widened. That was always the plan. The Admiral raised his hand and Cale saw a device mounted on his wrist. With casual indifference, Drackle pressed a button. The explosion tore through the warehouse's eastern wall, bringing down tons of stone and metal. Dust and smoke filled the air, and screams echoed from beneath the rubble. At least 6 resistance fighters had been crushed instantly. The next charge will bring down the entire building, Drackle said calmly. Give me the girl and the crystal, and the rest of you can die quickly instead of slowly. Cale's mind raced. There had to be another way out, some option they weren't seeing. The warehouse had multiple levels, and the tunnels they'd used to enter were still open. But moving 20 people through those narrow passages while under fire would be suicide. Aelia solved the problem for him. She stepped out from behind the pillar, her hands raised. I'll come with you, she said, but leave the others alone. No! Cal started forward, but she turned to face him, and the expression in her aquamarine eyes stopped him cold. Trust me, those eyes said. Drackle gestured to his troops, and 2 of them moved forward to secure Aelia. As they reached for her, she suddenly dropped to her knees and pressed both hands against the warehouse floor. The wave of emotion that erupted from her was unlike anything Cale had ever experienced. Pure, distilled terror poured out in all directions, but it was selective. The Dominion forces felt at full strength, while the resistance fighters were shielded somehow. Trained soldiers who had faced death across a dozen worlds suddenly found themselves paralyzed with primal fear. Some dropped their weapons and ran. Others simply collapsed, overwhelmed by sensations their minds couldn't process. Even Admiral Drackle staggered, his pale face going even whiter. Now! Aelia gasped, her strength clearly failing. The resistance fighters didn't need to be told twice. They poured out of cover, overwhelming the confused and terrified Dominion forces with primitive weapons and raw fury. Steel met flesh in a dozen different conflicts, and the warehouse floor grew slick with blood. Cal reached Aelia just as she collapsed. She was unconscious but breathing, her blue skin almost translucent with exhaustion. Sarah, he called, we need to get out of here now. Sarah appeared at his side, her bronze skin splattered with someone else's blood. The tunnels. Can you carry her? Yes. Cal scooped Aelia up in his arms, surprised again at how little she weighed. The container with the crystal was still secured to his belt, its weight a constant reminder of the stakes they were playing for. Marcus rallied the surviving resistance fighters as more explosions shook the warehouse. Everyone out! Rendezvous at Safe House 3. They ran through collapsing corridors and down into the tunnel system as the building came apart above them. The stone passages amplified every sound, turning their footsteps into thunderclaps and their breathing into windstorms. Admiral Drackle's voice echoed behind them, distorted by the acoustics but still carrying its cold authority. Find them. I don't care if you have to tear this entire city apart. Bring me that crystal and the Illyrian. The tunnels seemed to go on forever, branching and merging in patterns that defied logic. Sarah led them with the confidence of someone who knew every stone, but Cale could see the strain in her movements. They'd lost people back there. friends and comrades who'd been fighting this war long before he'd arrived. They emerged into a cellar that smelled of wine and age. Stone steps led upward to what appeared to be a tavern's back room. Sarah checked that the coast was clear, then motioned them forward. The tavern was typical of establishments on the frontier worlds. Low lighting, rough wooden furniture, and patrons who minded their own business. But Cal noticed that several of the drinkers had weapons close at hand, and their eyes tracked every movement. "Safe house?" he asked Sarah quietly. "One of several. The owner's been with us for years." They climbed more stairs to a private room above the main floor. Marcus immediately began setting up communication equipment while other resistance fighters took positions at the windows. The sense of organized purpose was impressive, but Cal could see it wouldn't last long. They were still trapped in a city under siege. Alia stirred in his arms as he set her down on a narrow cot. Her eyes opened slowly, focusing on his face with obvious effort. "Did it work?" she whispered. "We got away. But Drakel's still out there, and he's not going to give up. He killed my parents, my entire family, everyone I'd ever known." Her voice was soft, but there was steel underneath it. "He thinks compassion is weakness, that caring about others makes you vulnerable." "Maybe it does," Cal said honestly. "I'd be off this planet by now if I hadn't cared about a chain girl in a shop." "And you regret it." Cal looked around the room at the men and women preparing to fight and die for people they'd never met, for principles they couldn't compromise. He thought about the crystal and the evidence it contained, about the other Illyrian survivors hiding in the darkness between stars. "No," he said, "I don't regret it." Marcus approached them, his scarred face grim. "We've got a problem. Drakel's declared martial law throughout the city. No one gets in or out without his personal authorization, and he's offering a reward for information about you two that's larger than most planets' annual budgets." "So we're trapped," Sarah said from her position at the window. "Maybe not." Marcus pulled out a data pad and activated it. A holographic map of the city appeared, showing troop positions and patrol routes. "There's a maintenance shaft that runs under the spaceport. It's too small for regular patrols, but 2 people could make it through." "Where does it come out?" Cale asked. "Docking Bay 97. There's a ship there that belongs to a smuggler named Jake Morrison. He owes us favors." Sarah shook her head. "Morrison's reliable, but his ship won't hold everyone. We're talking about maybe 4 people, maximum." The implications hung in the air like smoke. They could get the crystal to safety, but it would mean leaving the resistance fighters behind to face Drakel's wrath. "I'll go," Alia said quietly, "with Cale and the crystal. The rest of you have been fighting this war longer than we have. You know how to survive." "She's right," Marcus said reluctantly. "Getting that evidence to the Free Worlds Alliance is more important than any of our individual lives, but I'm sending Sarah with you. You'll need someone who knows the way." Before anyone could respond, the building shook with a tremendous impact. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the lights flickered. "Artillery," Marcus muttered. "He's shelling the entire district." Another impact, closer this time. Through the windows, they could see flames rising from nearby buildings. Drakel wasn't taking any chances. He was going to level the entire area rather than let them escape. "Move now," Marcus ordered. "If we wait any longer, there won't be anything left to escape to." They gathered their few possessions and weapons, then descended into the tavern cellar. Marcus led them to what appeared to be a solid stone wall, but when he pressed a particular sequence of stones, a section swung inward on hidden hinges. The maintenance shaft beyond was exactly as advertised, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, with pipes and conduits running along both sides. The air was stale and humid, thick with the smell of machinery and recycled atmosphere. "Follow this tunnel for 2 kilometers, Marcus said to Sarah. "It'll branch 3 times, but stay on the main route. The ship should be waiting." "What about you?" Cale asked. Marcus's scarred face split into a grin that held no humor whatsoever. "We're going to make sure Drakel has other things to worry about. Give us 30 minutes, then move. You'll know when to start." They said their goodbyes quickly, without sentiment. These people had learned long ago that emotion was a luxury they couldn't afford. But as Cale shook Marcus's hand, he saw something in the older man's eyes that looked like hope. "Get that crystal to the Alliance," Marcus said quietly. "Make sure everyone knows what the Dominion really is." The crawl through the maintenance shaft was a nightmare of claustrophobia and discomfort. The pipes radiated heat that turned the tunnel into an oven, and the constant sound of machinery made conversation impossible. Kyle's shoulders ached from the awkward position, and he couldn't imagine how Alia was managing with her smaller frame. Sarah led the way with the confidence of someone who'd used these routes before. Behind him, Cal could hear Alia's labored breathing, but she never complained or asked to rest. The girl had a core of steel that impressed him more with each passing hour. Exactly 30 minutes after they'd entered the shaft, the world above them exploded into violence. Even through tons of stone and metal, they could hear the distinctive sounds of urban warfare, energy weapons, primitive explosives, and the screams of the dying. Marcus had kept his promise. The resistance was giving Drakel everything he could handle. The shaft branched as promised, and Sarah led them along the main route. The air grew fresher as they moved away from the city center, carrying hints of the recycled atmosphere common to spaceports. They were close. When Sarah finally stopped and pointed upward, Kel felt a relief so intense it was almost physical. A maintenance hatch was set into the tunnel ceiling, secured with a simple manual lock. Sarah worked the mechanism carefully, then eased the hatch open. Cool air and artificial lighting flooded into the tunnel. "Docking Bay 97, she whispered. "Jake's ship should be right there." They climbed out of the shaft into the sterile environment of the spaceport. The bay was quiet except for the distant hum of environmental systems. And there, sitting on her landing struts like a metal predator, was a ship that had seen better decades. She was a modified light freighter, built for speed rather than cargo capacity. Her hull was pocked with micrometeorite impacts and scorched by atmospheric entries, but her engines looked well maintained. Most importantly, her registration codes were current. A man emerged from the ship's cargo ramp as they approached. He was tall and lean, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of tan that came from spending time under different suns. His clothes were practical and well-worn, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent his life on the edge of civilized space. "Jake Morrison," he said, extending a calloused hand to Sarah. "Marcus sent word you might be coming." "Can you get us off planet?" Sarah asked without preamble. "Depends on where you want to go and how much heat you're carrying." Jake's eyes fixed on the container at Kale's belt, then moved to Alia's distinctive blue skin. "Jesus Christ. You're the ones Drakel's been screaming about on every comm frequency. Can you do it or not?" Kale demanded. Jake was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant as he calculated risks and rewards. Finally, he nodded. "Yeah, I can do it, but it's going to cost you everything you've got, and then some." "Name your price," Sarah said. "I want to know what's in that container, and I want to meet the girl who's got half the Dominion fleet looking for her." Kale looked at Alia, who nodded slightly. They needed this man's help, and lies wouldn't serve them well if they were going to be traveling together. "Military secrets," Kyle said simply. "Evidence of war crimes that could bring down the current Dominion government. And her." "I'm the last witness," Alia said, her voice steady despite everything they'd been through. "The last person alive who saw what they did to my world." Jake stared at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. "Illyrian Prime. You know about it. I was there. Part of a supply convoy that arrived just after." He shook his head. "I've spent 10 years trying to forget what I saw." The implications hit Kale like a physical blow. Jake wasn't just a smuggler looking for profit. He was someone with his own reasons for hating the Dominion. "Then you understand why we need to get that crystal to the Free Worlds Alliance," Sarah said. "Better than you know." Jake turned toward his ship. "Get aboard. We launch in 5 minutes." They followed him up the cargo ramp into the ship's interior. It was cramped but functional, with every centimeter of space used efficiently. The corridors were narrow, forcing them to move single file, but everything looked clean and well-maintained. Jake led them to a small passenger cabin with 2 narrow bunks and basic amenities. "It's not luxury, but it's better than a maintenance shaft. Strap yourselves in. Once we clear atmosphere, we'll talk about where we're going." As Jake disappeared toward the cockpit, Kale helped Alia secure herself in one of the bunks. She was clearly exhausted, her blue skin pale and her movement sluggish. The effort of projecting emotions during the warehouse battle had taken more out of her than she'd admitted. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. "I'll survive. But Kale, there's something I need to tell you about what I did back there. You saved our lives. Maybe, but using my abilities like that, it changes things. Other Illyrians will be able to sense what I've done, including the survivors the crystal can help us find. Is that bad? I don't know. My people were pacifists. We used our empathic abilities to heal, to comfort, to bring understanding between different species. What I did in that warehouse was the opposite of everything we stood for. The ship shuddered as the engines came online, followed by the distinctive whine of repulsors engaging. Through the small porthole, Kyle could see the docking bay floor falling away as they lifted off. Sometimes survival requires us to do things we never thought we could, he said. That doesn't make you evil. It makes you adaptable. And if I have to do it again. Cal met her aquamarine eyes steadily. Then you do what you have to do, but you don't have to face it alone. The ship bucked and shuddered as they hit the upper atmosphere. Warning lights flashed in the corridors, and Jake's voice came over the intercom. We've got company. 3 Dominion interceptors, closing fast. This might get rough. Through the porthole, Kyle could see the sleek shapes of military vessels moving to intercept their course. Energy weapons began firing, their bolts creating brilliant flashes against the starfield. Jake's ship responded with maneuvers that pressed them deep into their bunks. The modified freighter might not look like much, but she could move when she needed to. They spiraled and twisted through 3-dimensional space, using every trick in the book to avoid the interceptor's fire. Can we outrun them? Sarah called from the cabin's intercom. Maybe, if I can get us to the hyperspace jump point before they bracket our position. More enemy fire, closer this time. The ship's hull rang like a bell as a near miss sent shock waves through the superstructure. Cale found himself holding his breath, waiting for the hit that would end everything. But Jake Morrison hadn't survived decades of smuggling by being careless. He pushed his ship to its limits and beyond, coaxing performance from engines that should have failed years ago. They twisted between the interceptors like a fish swimming through a net, always just out of reach. Jump point in 30 seconds, Jake announced. The interceptors made one final desperate attempt to stop them, concentrating their fire in a pattern that should have been impossible to avoid. But Jake had one more trick up his sleeve. He shut down the engines completely, letting momentum carry them forward while their heat signature disappeared. The concentrated fire passed just behind them, close enough to cook hull plating, but not close enough to kill. Jumping now! The universe twisted inside out, then snapped back to normal. They were in hyperspace, safe from pursuit for the moment. Cale felt the tension drain from his shoulders as Jake's voice came over the intercom again. We're clear. Everyone to the main cabin for a strategy session. The main cabin was larger than their quarters, but still cramped with 4 people in it. Jake had activated a holographic star chart that filled the center of the room, showing their current position and possible destinations. Where's the nearest Free Worlds Alliance base? Sarah asked. Depends on what you mean by nearest. In terms of distance, there's a listening post at Kepler Station, but it's lightly defended and probably wouldn't know what to do with evidence this important. Jake manipulated the star chart, highlighting different systems in various colors. For something like this, you want to go straight to Alliance Command on New Geneva, but that's a 2-week journey through some very dangerous space. What kind of dangerous? Kyle asked. Pirates, mostly. The hyperspace routes to New Geneva pass through the Broken Stars Nebula, which has been a haven for criminals since before the Dominion existed. They don't care about politics, but they'll kill you for your cargo without a second thought. Alia had been silent through the discussion, but now she looked up from where she'd been studying the star chart. There's another option, she said quietly. The crystal contains coordinates for safe houses where other Illyrian survivors might be hiding, if we could reach even one of them. 2 Illyrians would be twice as effective at inspiring rebellion, Sarah finished, but it's also twice as risky. We'd be exposing survivors who have managed to stay hidden. And we'd be splitting our forces, Jake added. Right now, getting that crystal to Alliance Command is the sure thing. Everything else is a gamble. Cale found himself torn between competing loyalties. The logical choice was to head directly for New Geneva and deliver the evidence to people who could use it effectively. But looking at Alia, at the hope in her aquamarine eyes when she talked about other survivors, he knew logic wasn't the only factor. What does your gut tell you? He asked Jake. The smuggler was quiet for a moment, his weathered face thoughtful. My gut tells me that one piece of evidence, no matter how damning, isn't going to bring down something as big as the Dominion. But if you could get multiple survivors together, if you could create a symbol of hope that people could rally around, I know, That might actually change things, Sarah concluded. They studied the star chart in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Alia spoke. There's a safe house in the Arcturus system, only 3 days from here, and it's off the main shipping lanes. If there are survivors there, they would have heard about what happened on Arcturus Prime by now. They'll be expecting contact. And if there aren't any survivors, Jake asked, then we continue to New Geneva and hope the evidence is enough. Kyle felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. 3 lives hung in the balance, maybe more. But beyond that were billions of people living under Dominion oppression, waiting for someone to light a spark that could ignite a rebellion. Arcturus it is, he said. Jake nodded and began programming their new course. ETA 72 hours. I suggest everyone get some rest. Once we drop out of hyperspace, things are going to get complicated again. As the others dispersed to their quarters, Cale found himself alone with Alia in the main cabin. She was staring at the star chart, her expression distant. Second thoughts, he asked. Many thoughts. About my people, about what we were and what we might become. The Illyrians were peaceful, Kyle. We believed that violence only created more violence, that understanding was always possible if you tried hard enough. And now I've used my abilities to terrorize enemies and inspire allies to kill. I've become something my ancestors would barely recognize. Cal sat down beside her, close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her aquamarine eyes. Maybe your ancestors never faced extinction. Maybe they never had to choose between their principles and their survival. Or maybe I'm just rationalizing what I've become. Maybe, but I've seen you show compassion to someone who didn't deserve it, courage when you had every reason to be afraid, and hope when the rest of us were ready to give up. If that's what you've become, I think your ancestors would be proud. She turned to look at him, and for a moment the distance between them seemed to shrink to nothing. Then the ship shuddered slightly as Jake made a course correction, and the moment passed. I should get some rest, Alia said, standing. Tomorrow we find out if there's anyone left to save. The next 3 days passed in a blur of hyperspace travel and nervous tension. Jake kept them informed of their progress, but there was little to do except wait and worry. Alia spent hours in meditation, preparing herself for what they might find. Sarah cleaned weapons and planned tactical scenarios. Kyle found himself pacing the ship's narrow corridors, his mind running through endless variations of what could go wrong. On the morning of the 3rd day, Jake's voice over the intercom brought them all to the main cabin. Dropping out of hyperspace in 10 minutes, Arcturus system dead ahead. The transition back to normal space was smoother than their escape from Arcturus Prime, but the view that greeted them was anything but reassuring. The system's outer planets were barren ice worlds, and the inner system showed signs of recent military activity. Sensor readings showed debris in orbit around the 4th planet, Jake reported grimly. Looks like there was a battle here recently. How recently? Sarah asked. Hard to say. Could be days, could be weeks, but there's definitely something wrong. As they moved deeper into the system, the debris field became more defined. Twisted metal and frozen atmosphere told the story of ships that had died violently. Most of the wreckage was civilian, but Cale could see the distinctive angular shapes of Dominion warships among the ruins. There, Alia said suddenly, pointing at the holographic display. The 3rd moon of the gas giant. That's where the safe house should be. Jake adjusted their course, but his expression remained troubled. I'm not reading any life signs. No power signatures, no communications. Either nobody's home or... He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew what the alternative was. The moon was a small, airless world with an artificial atmosphere contained beneath a transparent dome. As they approached, they could see that the dome had been breached in several places, and the atmosphere was slowly bleeding into space. Setting down outside the main complex, Jake announced. Everyone suit up. We're going to need environmental gear. The surface of the moon was a wasteland of gray dust and jagged rocks. The complex itself was built into a natural cave system, with only the dome and a few surface structures visible. But even from a distance, they could see the damage. Energy weapon burns scarred the dome's surface, and several of the surface buildings had been reduced to rubble. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been subtle. They approached the main airlock cautiously, weapons ready. The outer door hung open, its safety systems long since failed. Inside, emergency lighting cast everything in a hellish red glow. The first body they found was just inside the entrance. It was humanoid but not human, with the distinctive blue skin of an Illyrian. The cause of death was obvious. A close-range energy weapon blast to the chest. Alia knelt beside the body, her face pale behind her environmental helmet's faceplate. His name was Jaren. He was a teacher on our homeworld. They found more bodies as they moved deeper into the complex. Men, women, even children, all of them showing the same blue-tinged skin, all of them dead. How did the Dominion find them? Sarah asked quietly. They didn't, a new voice said from the shadows. They spun toward the sound, weapons raised. A figure emerged from a side corridor, moving slowly with hands clearly visible. It was another Illyrian, this one female and visibly injured. Her left arm hung useless at her side, and there was a partially healed wound across her forehead. Lisa, Alia breathed. You're alive. The injured woman managed a weak smile. Barely. And not for much longer, I think. They helped her to a chair in what had been the complex common area. The room showed signs of hasty evacuation, overturned furniture, scattered belongings, and the lingering smell of fear. What happened here? Cale asked gently. Betrayal, Lisa said simply. One of our own, a man named Derek Walsh. He made a deal with the Dominion, information about our locations in exchange for his own safety. Where is he now? Dead. I killed him myself when I realized what he'd done, but it was too late. The damage was already done. Alia knelt beside the injured woman. How many others escaped? Maybe 6 or 7. They scattered when the attack began, heading for different safe houses. But Cale, the Dominion didn't just come here to kill us. They were looking for something specific. What? Lisa reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device, no larger than a communicator. It's a beacon that can reach other Illyrian survivors across the galaxy. A way to coordinate resistance activities. The implications were staggering. If the Dominion had managed to capture and decrypt that beacon, every remaining Illyrian in the galaxy would be exposed. Did they get the encryption codes? Sarah asked. No, Derek didn't have access to them, but they got everything else. Safe house locations, identity codes, even family relationships. Lisa's voice was growing weaker. They'll be hitting every location within days. Cal felt the weight of failure settling over him like a shroud. They'd risked everything to reach this place, only to arrive too late to save anyone. But Alia seemed to find new strength in the tragedy around them. She stood, her aquamarine eyes blazing with determination. Then we warned them. We used that beacon to send out a general alert, tell everyone to abandon their safe houses and go to ground. And then what? Lisa asked. We spend the rest of our lives running and hiding while the Dominion picks us off one by one. No, Alia said firmly. Then we fight back. We use our abilities not just to hide, but to inspire others. We become the symbol of hope that Marcus talked about. Jake had been silent through the exchange, but now he stepped forward. I hate to interrupt, but we've got company. 3 ships just dropped out of hyperspace, and they're broadcasting Dominion identification codes. How long before they get here? Sarah asked. 20 minutes, maybe less. Lisa struggled to her feet, her face gray with pain and exhaustion. There's an escape tunnel that leads to the far side of the complex. You might be able to reach your ship without being seen. What about you? Alia asked. I'm dying anyway. Internal injuries from the attack. But I can buy you time. She activated the beacon with trembling fingers. A soft chime indicated that it was transmitting, sending out a warning to every Illyrian survivor in the galaxy. Lisa's voice, weak but clear, filled the room as she began to speak. This is Lisa Chen, survivor of the Arcturus incident. The safe houses have been compromised. Repeat, all safe houses have been compromised. Scatter and go to ground. Trust no one you haven't known for years. And remember, we are not just survivors anymore. We are the resistance. The beacon's light faded as the transmission ended. Lisa sank back into her chair, her breathing labored. Go, she whispered, before it's too late. They ran through the complex's winding corridors, following signs toward the emergency exit. Behind them, they could hear the distinctive whine of Dominion dropships entering the atmosphere. The escape tunnel was barely wide enough for one person at a time, and it seemed to go on forever. When they finally emerged on the moon's far side, Jake's ship was barely visible in the distance. They'll see us the moment we try to take off, Jake said grimly. Maybe not. Alia closed her eyes and pressed her hands against the moon's surface. I can project confusion, make their sensors unreliable, but I'll need time to build up the effect. How much time? 5 minutes, maybe 10. Sarah was scanning the horizon with binoculars. We don't have 10 minutes. I can see ground troops deploying from the dropships. Kel made a decision that surprised even himself. I'll create a distraction. Draw them away from the ship. That's suicide, Jake protested. Maybe, but it's better than all of us dying here. Before anyone could stop him, Kale was running back toward the complex. His footsteps kicked up clouds of lunar dust that would be visible to anyone watching. Within minutes, searchlights began sweeping in his direction. He reached the complex's main entrance just as the first Dominion troops arrived. These weren't regular soldiers, but elite commandos. Their black armor designed for zero-atmosphere combat. They moved with the coordination of a unit that had worked together for years. Cal took cover behind a piece of debris and drew his blade. It seemed woefully inadequate against energy weapons and advanced armor, but it was all he had. The first commando rounded the corner with his weapon raised. Cal moved before the man could fire, his blade finding the gap between helmet and chestplate. The Dominion soldier fell without a sound, but his squad mates immediately converged on Cal's position. Energy bolts began chewing through his cover, forcing him to keep moving. He rolled and dodged, using every piece of training he'd ever received. But there were too many of them, and his blade couldn't reach them all. Just as he was certain he was about to die, something changed in the battlefield dynamics. The Dominion soldiers began firing at shadows, their movements becoming confused and erratic. Alia's abilities were affecting them from kilometers away, turning their coordination against them. Kale pressed his advantage, using their confusion to even the odds. His blade found targets with surgical precision, and soon the entrance to the complex was littered with bodies. But reinforcements were coming, and he was running out of places to hide. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, Jake's ship roared overhead, its engines kicking up clouds of dust that provided perfect cover. The cargo ramp lowered as the ship hovered just above the surface. Kel ran toward it, energy bolts sizzling past his head. Strong hands pulled him aboard just as Jake's ship lifted off and accelerated toward the safety of space. Next time, Sarah said as she helped him to his feet, we stick together. Cal nodded, too winded to argue. Through the ship's portholes, he could see the moon falling away below them. Somewhere down there, Lisa was making her final stand, buying them the time they needed to escape. As they cleared the system's gravity well and prepared to jump to hyperspace, Alia activated the beacon they'd recovered. Her voice was stronger now, filled with purpose. This is Alia, daughter of Illyrian Prime. I'm calling all survivors to a new gathering place. Coordinates to follow. We are no longer hiding. We are no longer running. The time has come to fight back. She transmitted the coordinates for New Geneva, then added something that surprised everyone. And to any humans listening, any species that values freedom over oppression, you are not alone. The Illyrian people stand with you. Together we will bring down the Dominion and create a galaxy where all beings can live in peace. As Jake engaged the hyperdrive, Kale found himself thinking about what they'd accomplished and what lay ahead. They'd saved one life and lost dozens of others. They'd gained a powerful ally in Jake Morrison, an intelligence that could reshape the war. But most importantly, they'd lit a spark that could ignite rebellion across the galaxy. The journey to New Geneva would take 2 weeks through some of the most dangerous space in the galaxy. But for the first time since this whole adventure began, Kale felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. The Broken Stars Nebula earned its name from the shattered remnants of a star system that had been destroyed in some ancient cataclysm. The debris created perfect hiding places for pirates and worse, while the electromagnetic interference made long-range sensors useless. Stay sharp, Jake warned as they dropped out of hyperspace at the nebula's edge. This is where things get interesting. The first attack came within hours. 3 modified fighters emerged from the nebula's swirling gases, their hulls scarred and their weapons obviously jury-rigged. Pirates looking for easy prey. But Jake's ship was anything but easy prey. Hidden weapon systems deployed from concealed panels, and the modified freighters suddenly bristled with enough firepower to take on a Dominion cruiser. The pirate attack lasted less than 10 minutes. When it was over, 2 of the attacking ships were drifting hulks, and the third was limping back into the nebula. Impressive, Sarah commented. Most smugglers don't carry that kind of hardware. Jake's expression was grim. Most smugglers haven't seen what I've seen. After Illyrian Prime, I decided I'd never be helpless again. They pressed deeper into the nebula, following routes that Jake claimed to know by heart. The swirling gases created an otherworldly landscape of colors and shadows, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. But they weren't the only ones using these routes. On the third day, they encountered something much worse than pirates. The ship appeared on their sensors without warning, its stealth systems obviously more advanced than anything the pirates possessed. It was sleek and predatory, with the kind of smooth lines that spoke of military design. Dominion Hunter-Killer, Jake identified grimly. They must have been waiting for us. The enemy ship's communication system crackled to life, filling their cockpit with a familiar voice. This is Admiral Drakel aboard the Vengeance. You've led us quite a chase, but it ends here. Surrender now and I might let some of you live. How did he track us through the nebula? Sarah asked. Alia's face had gone pale. He's got an Illyrian with him, someone who can sense my presence across interstellar distances. The implications were terrifying. If the Dominion had captured and brainwashed an Illyrian into serving them, then nowhere in the galaxy would be safe. Can you tell who it is? Kale asked. No, but they're projecting despair, trying to break our will to fight before the battle even begins. Jake's hands moved across his controls with practiced efficiency. Well, they picked the wrong targets for that particular trick. Everyone hold on. We're going into the deep nebula. What followed was a three-dimensional game of cat and mouse through the twisted remains of dead worlds. Jake pushed his ship to its limits, using every trick of piloting he'd learned in decades of smuggling. The nebula's electromagnetic interference made targeting difficult, but it worked both ways. Energy bolts lit up the cosmic debris field as both ships fought for advantage. Jake's superior knowledge of the terrain gave them an edge, but Drakel's ship was newer and more heavily armed. I've got an idea, Sarah said suddenly, but it's going to require perfect timing. What do you have in mind? Jake asked, pulling into a tight spiral to avoid incoming fire. There's a cluster of metallic asteroids about 2 clicks ahead. If we can lure them in close and detonate our cargo bay explosive charges at just the right moment, we'll turn those asteroids into the galaxy's largest fragmentation bomb, Jake finished. I like it, but we'll only get one shot. They led Drakel's ship on a carefully choreographed chase through the asteroid field. The Admiral was too experienced to fall for obvious traps, but Sarah wasn't looking for obvious. She was counting on his arrogance. At the critical moment, Jake cut his engines completely. Drakel's ship overshot their position, passing directly through the center of the metallic asteroid cluster. Sarah triggered the explosives. The detonation turned dozens of asteroids into high-velocity projectiles, creating a sphere of death that no amount of armor could withstand. Drakel's ship disappeared in a brilliant flash of light and superheated metal, but their victory was short-lived. As the explosion's light faded, they could see that Drakel's ship had survived, though it was clearly damaged. Shields held, Jake reported grimly, but they're hurt. Now's our chance. They closed the distance rapidly, Jake's weapon systems locking onto the enemy ship's damaged sections. But as they prepared to fire the killing shot, Alia suddenly cried out in pain. Stop! There are innocents aboard that ship. Prisoners, including the Illyrian, who's been helping them track us. Kyle felt his jaw clench. It was a tactical nightmare. They had the advantage, but using it might mean killing the very people they were trying to save. We can't just let Drakel escape, Sarah protested. He'll keep hunting us until one of us is dead. Then we give him what he wants, Cal said suddenly. We surrender. Everyone in the cockpit turned to stare at him as if he'd lost his mind. Hear me out, he continued. Drakel wants the crystal and he wants Alia. If we can make him think he's won, get close enough to his ship. We could rescue the prisoners and destroy his ship from the inside, Jake finished. It's completely insane. But it might work, Sarah added reluctantly. Alia was quiet for a moment, her aquamarine eyes distant as she considered the plan. The other Illyrian aboard that ship, I can sense their pain. They're being tortured, used as a tool against their own people. If we can free them. 2 Illyrians working together would be twice as effective at inspiring rebellion, Cal concluded. Jake sighed and began powering down his weapons. I really hope you people know what you're doing. The surrender was a carefully choreographed performance. Jake transmitted their submission on all frequencies, making sure it sounded appropriately defeated. Drakel's response was immediate and predictably arrogant. Drop your shields and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in summary execution. Dominion troops swarmed aboard their ship within minutes of docking. They were professionals, moving with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice. But they were also overconfident, certain that their quarry had finally given up. Kyle, Alia, and Sarah were marched aboard Drakel's ship in restraints, while Jake was left behind with a skeleton crew. The interior of the Dominion vessel was all sharp angles and polished metal, designed to intimidate rather than comfort. Admiral Drakel was waiting for them in what appeared to be an interrogation chamber. He looked older than he had on Arcaris Prime, with new lines around his eyes and a slight tremor in his hands. The pursuit had taken its toll on him as well. "The famous rebels," he said with a cold smile. "You've cost me 3 ships and 200 good soldiers. I hope you've enjoyed your little adventure, because it ends here." He gestured to a figure standing in the shadows behind him. "I'd like you to meet my associate, another survivor of your extinct race." The figure stepped forward, and Kale heard Alia gasp. It was an Illyrian male, his blue skin marked with scars and his silver hair cropped short. But his eyes were the worst part. They held no hope, no compassion, no trace of the empathy that defined his species. "His name is Marcus Stone," Drakel continued. "After we captured him, we spent months teaching him the futility of resistance. Now he helps us track down other survivors." "You're wrong," Alia said quietly. "He's not helping you. He's enduring." Marcus's dead eyes flickered for just a moment, and Kale saw something that might have been recognition. "Enduring for what?" Drakel laughed. "His people are extinct. His cause is hopeless. He serves us now because it's the only way to avoid further pain." "He serves you because he's waiting," Alia replied, "waiting for the right moment to strike back." Drakel's expression darkened. "Enough. You'll both learn the same lesson he did. Pain is an excellent teacher." But as the Admiral reached for a control panel that would presumably activate some form of torture device, Marcus Stone moved. His hand found the energy weapon at Drakel's belt, and suddenly the balance of power in the room shifted dramatically. "Get down!" Marcus shouted. They hit the floor as energy bolts filled the air. Marcus had turned Drakel's own weapon against the Dominion troops, his movements fluid despite months of captivity. The element of surprise gave them a crucial advantage. Alia rolled toward the nearest wall console and began working frantically at the controls. "I'm releasing the other prisoners," she called over the sound of weapons fire. Within moments, the ship's corridors filled with the sounds of rebellion. Freed captives began fighting their former captors with whatever weapons they could find, turning the vessel into a 3-dimensional battlefield. Cal found himself back-to-back with Marcus, both of them armed now with captured Dominion weapons. The scarred Illyrian fought with a cold efficiency that spoke of long practice. "How many others are there?" Kyle asked during a brief lull in the fighting. "Dozens. Political prisoners, captured resistance fighters, civilians who asked too many questions. Drakel's been collecting enemies of the state for months." Sarah appeared at the end of the corridor, leading a group of former prisoners toward the ship's armory. "We've secured the weapons locker. Time to even the odds." What followed was brutal urban warfare in the confines of a starship. Every corridor became a battlefield, every room a potential trap. But the freed prisoners fought with the desperate courage of people who had nothing left to lose. Admiral Drakel made his last stand on the ship's bridge, surrounded by his remaining loyal troops. When Kale and the others finally fought their way through, they found him standing over the ship's self-destruct console. "You think you've won," he snarled, his pale face twisted with rage. "But this changes nothing. The Dominion is eternal. Your little rebellion will be crushed like all the others." "Maybe," Kale admitted, "but you won't be around to see it." Drakel's hand moved toward the self-destruct button, but Alia was faster. A wave of pure terror erupted from her, focused entirely on the Admiral. He collapsed, overwhelmed by emotions his mind couldn't process. "The bridge is ours," Sarah reported, "and Jake's signaling that he's retaken our ship." Marcus moved to the navigation console and began plotting a course. "We need to get out of here before Dominion reinforcements arrive. The nearest safe harbor is a Free Worlds Alliance base in the Centauri system." "What about Drakel?" one of the former prisoners asked, gesturing toward the unconscious Admiral. Cal looked at the man who had caused so much suffering, who had ordered the extinction of an entire species. Justice demanded retribution, but mercy demanded something different. "We take him with us," he decided. "Let the Alliance put him on trial." Let the galaxy see what the Dominion really is. The journey to the Alliance base took 3 days, with Jake's ship and the captured Dominion vessel traveling together. It gave them time to process what they'd accomplished and plan for what came next. The crystal's evidence was even more damning than they'd hoped. It contained detailed records of Dominion war crimes across dozens of systems, including the complete extermination of 3 different species. But more importantly, it contained the locations of secret Dominion facilities and the names of high-ranking officials involved in the atrocities. This could bring down the current government, Marcus said as they reviewed the data, but only if it reaches the right people. And if the Alliance has the courage to act on it, Sarah added, they've been cautious about direct confrontation with the Dominion. Aelia had been quiet through most of the journey, spending her time with the other freed prisoners. Many of them were broken by their experiences, but her empathic abilities were helping them find the strength to continue. What happens to them? Kyle asked, watching her work with a young human girl who hadn't spoken since her rescue. They become symbols, Marcus replied, living proof that the Dominion can be defeated. Every person who sees them recover will know that resistance is possible. The Alliance base at Centauri was exactly what Kale had expected. Military efficiency wrapped in diplomatic protocol. They were met by a full honor guard and escorted to briefing rooms where intelligence officers began the lengthy process of verifying their evidence. But the real impact came when Aelia and Marcus stood before the Alliance Council and told their story. 2 Illyrians, survivors of genocide, speaking truth to power with voices that could not be ignored. The Dominion believes that compassion is weakness, Aelia said to the assembled representatives. They think that caring about others makes you vulnerable. But they're wrong. Compassion is what makes us strong. It's what makes us fight for something greater than ourselves. The Council's vote was unanimous. The Alliance would act on the evidence, sharing it with neutral systems and using it to build a coalition against Dominion tyranny. More importantly, they would provide resources for a new kind of resistance, one built around hope rather than fear. Kale found himself appointed as liaison between the human resistance movements and the Illyrian survivors. It wasn't a role he'd asked for, but it was one he accepted willingly. He'd started this journey trying to buy a navigation module. He was ending it as part of something much larger. As they prepared to leave Centauri for their next mission, Sarah pulled him aside. Any regrets? She asked. Kyle thought about everything they'd been through, everyone they'd lost, and everyone they'd saved. He thought about a blue-skinned girl chained in a shop, and how a simple act of compassion had changed the course of galactic history. None, he said, not a single one. The war against the Dominion would continue for years, spreading across hundreds of systems and involving millions of people. But it had begun with one human who couldn't ignore suffering and one Illyrian who refused to give up hope. And in the end, that made all the difference.